Hello, I'm Judy Stiles. Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. Well, the City of Joplin has taken a lot of steps in recent weeks dealing with a community development block grant. A lot of people have heard about it, and today we're going to find out some more of the details. Joining me, Troy Bolander, Joplin City Planner, and St. Anselm, the City Manager. Thank you for being here today.
Hey, Judy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's been in the news a lot, but I thought we maybe start off with some basic nuts and bolts explanations, and then we'll get into some more of the details. But someone walks up to you on the street and says, "What is a community development block grant?" How do you explain that to them?
Well, it can mean many things. I think with our disaster grant especially, the federal government, usually after a president has declared a disaster area, sometimes you're eligible for recovery funds. A lot of that is funneled through HUD and it's community development block grants. In this case, it's disaster community development block grant funds to help you with the recovery of Joplin. It can be used for housing, infrastructure, or economic development activities.
So we're dealing with federal funds assisting the City of Joplin.
Correct. Yeah, we received two allocations from CDBG. The first one was about a $45 million allocation, and then several months later we received an allocation of $113 million.
Okay. So as you've been talking in recent weeks, you're developing, I guess, the complete plan now, how to put all this together.
Yeah, we started looking at it pretty heavily in January of this year. We knew we were under a timetable to get these funds allocated and spent, and so we worked with staff and our partner with Deloitte to put together a process to evaluate all of the projects that had either been presented or identified since the time that those projects were originally presented, to evaluate those projects, make sure that they were going to meet the needs of the community and also meet the requirements of the grant. And so we just last week were able to successfully work with City Council to vote on the final list of projects that we can push forward with as we approach that deadline of 2017 and 2019.
So you have a definite timetable, but let's just work on these projects and so forth. Well, as we talk about some of these details, I guess we're talking about the projects, just coming up with the concept of these projects. You know, city planners, there's your department. I've seen needs throughout the years, and then you have a disaster add to it. That must have been quite a challenge.
It was a challenge, Judy, especially after disaster. Almost 30% of our town was impacted by this disaster. As you know, you saw homes totally destroyed, gone, jobs, businesses affected, infrastructure was totally decimated. So you see all these needs. So we do appreciate the assistance we got from the federal government, but it is a challenge coming up with a plan. That's what we're doing now, and I think you saw the first step, as Sam mentioned, the council finalizing the funding for the projects and hoping to proceed from there.
Right. Now you mentioned a firm helping you out. Explain for the viewers what you mean by someone was involved. The city hired someone to help with this process.
Yeah, so under HUD guidelines, they allow up to 20% of cost of that grant to be used for planning and administration purposes. So we knew with the staff levels that we had and the disaster that we were facing that we were going to need some help with the planning process. And so we contracted with a firm called Deloitte, and they do a couple of things for us. Number one, they make sure that we're spending the dollars appropriately, because there's always a risk if you misallocate those funds that the Office of Inspector General could come back and ask for those funds back. So if you've built a project and it was ultimately deemed ineligible, you would potentially put the city's financial treasury at risk in order to pay those funds back. So Deloitte, again, they help us make sure that we're spending those dollars properly, but then they also bring on additional staff as we need them to help with the planning process. So they've been working closely with Troy's group for a couple of years now, at least. Feels like forever sometimes.
You've gotten to know the people really well.
We're very close.
But that probably, I imagine, from a planner's perspective, that's helpful, because there are a lot of, I imagine, fine details you have to really follow.
Yeah, and you're always concerned about capacity, and there's the advantage of using these funds. There's 1,000 ways or 1,000 projects you can use them on. There's also 1,000 ways of getting in trouble. So we knew we needed someone with that expertise to come in and help us set up this program.
Well, I know we have some graphics. You showed some things at City Council, some of the meetings and some of the presentations, so we'll try to incorporate some of those as we go along. But I guess as you looked at projects, you kind of had to decide what are the possibilities, what can we do? We have a graphic on the screen called Project Prioritization.
Yes, what we did was we had Deloitte and city staff look at our long-range transportation plans and our comprehensive plan, and the Citizens Advisory Recovery Team, they put together a plan as well to take kind of what our needs were as a community after the disaster and moving forward. So we looked at all of those studies and kind of weighed projects against those different priorities that were established in those plans to ultimately come up with a list that council got to review last week. And so we had probably 12 projects that staff had identified as being good, solid uses of these particular funds. And so we worked with council over the course of 2 work sessions to do that. As a result of those meetings, it broke down, as Troy mentioned earlier, you can use those for certain projects, so economic development and infrastructure and housing are 3 kind of programs that are right in the wheelhouse of HUD funding. So we took those projects and kind of dumped those into various buckets and kind of wanted to see how those percentages shook out, so make sure we had a nice balance of the use of those funds. So I think just over maybe 48% of the funds we're going to use towards repairing infrastructure. 22% will go towards helping economic development projects and job creation. And then we have some schools and facilities that received a percentage of that funding as well.
Right. So you really had to, how can we best distribute this pot of this money that we have to work it throughout the community and so forth. Now we have another graphic, I think, that we could show the end result of what you've gone through, and then we'll talk about some background, how we set this up. But this is pretty much what the City Council came back and said, we agree with these projects.
Yeah, so I mean, Troy can certainly, if you have questions about specific ones.
Somebody says, well, define infrastructure. What do we mean? What do we need there? That's
well,
a big chunk of money.
Yeah, it is a big chunk, but I think it's the backbone of any type of redevelopment effort. As most citizens know, a lot of the infrastructure was affected, whether it was streets, curbs, gutters. A lot of people can't believe, well, how did the underground infrastructure...
the sewer runs under the street, how can it get damaged?
How did it get damaged? But you got to realize the strength of the tornado pulled up manholes. Debris got into the manholes, into the system, and damaged the system as well. So it's a major redevelopment effort when it comes to infrastructure, but it truly is the backbone of the recovery effort. You don't have sufficient infrastructure, redevelopment won't occur.
You can't build a business or a house if the sewers aren't going to work, basically. In layman's terms, you have to have all that put together.
That's correct.
So the area in which we're talking then is specifically, I guess, the damage zone, or how do you define that for people saying, what part of town are you looking at for these infrastructure?
Well, we call it the recovery area. It basically starts out close to 32nd and Schiffer-Decker, and it expands the length of the city to the west city limit. East city limit line. So it looks like a runway. Airport runway is how we used to call it.
So that's the area in which we'll be seeing these infrastructure improvements. And you've broken this down into 2 projects on your list that you had. So 2 different areas of emphasis then for those?
Well, and 2 different types of projects as well. You look at infrastructure project 1, and with HUD, you have to also have to keep track of how you benefit low to moderate income individuals. So we identified areas of that recovery zone that was low to moderate income, and infrastructure project 2 is that area outside the low to moderate income area. So it's basically for reporting purposes.
So dealing with the demographics of the community.
That's correct.
In which you're working together. And there's the aspect of streetscapes was also on your list. And some people say, well, what's a streetscape? I can understand, well, let's go pave the roads and put in sidewalks and fix the sewers, but how do you define a streetscape?
Well, streetscape is basically another infrastructure program. Typically what you'll see is new curbs, sidewalks being repaired or new. But also some additional amenities. Those corridors we have identified as trying to make it more pedestrian friendly, more bicycle friendly, so you'll see sidewalks, maybe bike lanes. It could include also decorative amenities, whether it be lighting and benches and trash receptacles.
So when you're rebuilding, you're bringing the town back differently than it was beforehand. You're giving this new look.
Hopefully the goal is to bring it back a little bit better than what it was before. And we've recognized through our comprehensions and some of our long-range plans that 20th Street is going to be a pretty key commercial corridor for us in the future. And so to make sure that that has a look and feel above and beyond what normally would be seen on some commercial areas is an attractive element, I think, to encourage the businesses to relocate in that specific area. So, yeah, we had realized through the first 2 infrastructure projects, though, that we were lacking the connectivity because those projects in the neighborhoods passed right through or just off of 20th Street and Main Street. So it's difficult to do the work in the neighborhoods without actually doing work on those main corridors as well. And as a city, we've heard about the condition of Main Street and that it needs to be improved. And we actually have city crews out on the roads today that are making some spot repairs and shaving down the high spots and filling in some of the low spots so that it makes the road a little bit more passable until we can actually implement the full repaving program through the CDBG dollars.
So it really all ties together. You have to have this piece to make this piece work.
That's correct, and that's the challenge with all of this.
So you mentioned having areas that, focusing on low and moderate income. People might be curious, well, how do you define that in the city of Joplin? What type of range?
Well, a lot of that's determined by a formula from HUD. And another key component of this program is we have to show HUD at the very end that at least 50% of the funds expended benefit low to moderate income individuals. So a lot of that is determined by census tract or census block group, census information. We identify those areas that are low to moderate income. We try to make sure that at least people in those areas benefit from these projects.
So they're looking that their money's not only going to build new facilities or new features, they want the citizens benefiting from these funds. Ultimately, tying that together, which kind of ties into looking at your list. You have, it looks like job training, advanced training center, those types of things. So it's the economic development aspect as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's also a critical component for any recovery. You have to have jobs for people to locate in your community or remain in your community. The challenge we've had in the past is some of the skill sets that are needed for these new jobs coming to Joplin or for an expansion of an industry in town. So we see this as a mechanism to train potential employees and acquire new skill sets to get a job.
So what type of, when you say skill sets, are we talking about welding or specific skills that people have to have specialized training for certain jobs?
Essentially, yeah. We've partnered with the Joplin Chamber Foundation and Crowder College to offer some programs that, again, advanced welding, some of those trades. Again, it'll be structured in a way that it'll be flexible enough to where if there's a prospective employer or if we have an existing business in the community perhaps who's wanting to expand or maybe get into a different area and they need to have a place to train their staff or new employees, this particular project we think would be able to help fit that need. And again, the goal is, as Troy mentioned, is you can't just focus all your dollars on infrastructure. You can't just focus it all on economic development because you have to meet that 51% threshold to benefit LMI. So putting job programs in place to help train those employees and those citizens to hopefully get above and beyond that LMI population level is a goal as well.
So you're looking down the road a little further in the future. We're going to have that for transition for people to improve their lives and working there. I also see the Joplin Senior Center on your list, $4.75 million. So another segment of the population. In our
Right,
community.
and that, as you know, that's a growing community or demographic in Joplin. The baby boomers are starting to retire. Also, Joplin is a unique situation where we have two regional medical facilities. We do find a lot of retirees coming to Joplin to live, to work, to play. And in this situation, the Joplin Senior Center was impacted by the disaster. They have some problems with their current facility, and that was one of the projects that Council selected to do.
So will it be work on their current site or a new facility? What are
Well,
we envisioning?
we haven't determined location yet. Right now, we're looking at building a new center. The current facility has a lot of problems.
A lot of issues
still
with what
today.
you have now.
Exactly.
Right. But that sounds like it's something that you're really coordinating efforts with the community and the agencies that run the senior center.
That's correct. We've had discussions with the Joplin Senior Center and their staff.
And tying that together. We also have JHAP. I think I've had shows before where people have talked about JHAP, but let's remind the viewers when we hear the acronym JHAP, what are we talking about for that?
Well, that's Joplin Homeowners Assistance Program, and this is a program that's been very successful. We've almost put, I believe, 300 families or people into homes in the recovery area. That entails providing down payment and closing cost assistance up to $30,000 or $35,000 depending on your financial situation. So it really encourages people to rebuild in basically what is a blighted area.
So people who maybe not have otherwise said, I don't have the funds, I can't rebuild, you're giving them that boost, that assistance to do that.
Exactly, yeah, and again, from an overall redevelopment of that area, you have to use those funds within the tornado zone. So we saw the lack of rooftops, and from an economic development perspective, we heard as well from potential businesses that wanted to locate in the area. They were concerned, well, there aren't as many rooftops as here as there used to be, so they are concerned about that. But we also have several multifamily housing projects that have come online since 2011, and so the number of rooftops might be fewer, but our census population and the projections are back up to what they were pre-tornado level, and actually above what the 2010 census level was. So we're proud of the fact that we've come back and we actually have more residents in the community now than we did before.
Prior to that. Now, the city monitor on a regular basis how many, quote, empty lots you might have that people haven't rebuilt on, and keep an eye on what's happening?
We try to keep track of that, and then we try to find, especially in the recovery area, if there's any incentives to encourage people to build on that lot or purchase a home. We're definitely keeping track of that.
Is this a JHAP program, something you communicate with the realtors or those who are involved in buying and selling property in real estate?
Realtors, home builders, yeah, we tried, and I think we're going to try and schedule another training session with those groups as well, to let them, remind them of the program and some of the guidelines, again, because it is a HUD-funded program. There are certain requirements that have to be met, and so to make sure that all of the stakeholders out there know exactly what's going on with that program. We need to try to get them in periodically and have those conversations.
Now, the money that you've allocated, or allocating for this program, is this an expansion then of the JHAP program that you have already in place? It's just helping continue it more?
Yeah, we had originally, almost 12 million, I think, that
correct.
we had identified for the project, and Council last week had realized, given the success of the program, they wanted to infuse a few more dollars into that to hopefully continue to put more rooftops in that area until such time where we, see a slowdown in the number of applications, then we could potentially reallocate those dollars. But it's been a successful program. It's met its goal, in terms of repopulating
What you've
the
already
area.
started and bringing people in.
So
right?
so if we can bring more success to it, then that would be a great thing.
Well, continuing on your list, you also have the Crossroads Industrial Park. Somebody might say, well, that's not in the zone. How does that tie into the project?
Well, it's not exactly in the zone, but it has to do with job creation. HUD does allow you, as part of the economic development component of all this, is jobs lost, to recreate those jobs or bring in new jobs to cover those losses. And that can occur anywhere in the community. They realize that, to create a job that was lost by disaster doesn't necessarily have to be in the disaster area or the recovery area. So we are looking at installing infrastructure in the Crossroad Industrial Park to encourage new businesses or existing businesses to expand in that area and create jobs.
And the city has had a very good history of industrial park success in this community.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've seen the Crossroads as they've expanded, Eagle Pitcher and some of the other companies that have moved into that area. There are certain infrastructure needs, and one of the key requirements of this funding as well is you can't just build something and hope that jobs are there. There has to be pretty much a project in the pipeline already that you can identify and say, yes, this infrastructure will support this particular job. And working with the chamber on various potential businesses out there, there are a couple of leads that we feel pretty comfortable with that we can use these funds safely and properly to build out the infrastructure and lead to the expansion of that park. So.
Do you think that'll help in the chamber and the city's efforts to attract businesses when they look at Joplin versus other communities and say, well, they've got things in place for us?
Exactly. Yeah. If the sewer is there and the roads are kind of roughed in, then at that point it makes it a lot easier for a company to say, yeah, let's go to Joplin, and much shorter build out time in terms of them to be able to get up and running.
So a lot of these pieces tying together that you're looking at bringing people in the future. We also have the community clinic. I'm skipping over this. Let's talk about the trail structure and construction. Joplin already, you've had a lot of trails put in the community, but you're emphasizing more trail development in that part of town?
That's correct. What we found with our other trails that we've installed over the last few years are very popular. Actually, it's become a driving force with redevelopment as well. We're finding great interest in the trail system and the expansion of the existing trail system. So we're looking at stalling off-road and on-road facilities in the recovery area.
So make it pedestrian-friendly, biker-friendly, jogger-friendly area in which to live and to work.
Yep.
And do you have certain goals to connecting certain parts of town? I know one time there were talk about we can have a trail from the north side of town to the south side of town and cross back and forth.
Yeah, and that's always the goal. Is not when you build something like that, is to connect destinations. As you know, we have a new medical center, or school, excuse me, coming to Joplin. We're hoping to connect to that area of town. Of course, 26th Street, 20th Street, and Main Street as well.
So we'll be able to get around that part of town and develop and have that opportunity. Now the community clinic, you have that on the list. And that, obviously, I imagine you're meeting the medical needs. You have the hospitals you've mentioned, but tell me how the community clinic ties into these.
Well, the clinic really had an expansion of, more of a demand after the disaster. Of course, that put a wear and tear on their existing facility. So pretty simple project. They were just requesting help and doing some improvements inside their building as a result of that increased demand.
And that's probably something that it not only increased after the disaster, but in the future medical care is still going to be a challenge for many people in the community.
Right, yeah, as Troy mentioned, we do have a medical school through KCUNB that'll be coming to town, and hopefully we'll open their classes in 2017. But as the needs of the community, as the community ages, those needs continue to grow as well. So the more opportunities we have to serve different client populations, I think, is beneficial for the community overall.
The access to people to have those facilities. And, now the Juvenile Detention Center, people look at the list and say, well, how does that tie into redevelopment? So.
When we first started out, we had the first question, that was our first question as well, but they do more than what the name implies. They actually provide social services to a demographic that may have some challenges, and what they're looking at, especially after disaster, they also saw an increase in some of their clientele as a result of the disaster. So we're hoping to help them with some of their services.
Will this be service or facility-based type funding?
Well, this will be service. They do have a demand for a facility. That's one thing that we could not tie to the disaster, but we could the services they were offering.
So providing the support staff, what it takes to do these types of programs,
correct.
and tying that together. Same thing with Ozark Mental Health Services. Are they trying to allow them to provide more?
As you can imagine, their workload increased after the disaster, and still today, they're still serving a clientele that's been traumatized by disaster, and they have simply requested help in their needs and services.
So these are the first 12 items on your list that we showed earlier. There are a lot of just the requirements. I think they have a graphic that we can look at. You talked about economic development, and they have an example here, kind of your basics. It says 101. What makes it an eligible economic development activity? So you have to really talk about this. You say job training, the types of things that you're doing to help a lot of people. And tell me about some of the key points as you were looking at, a lot of people probably had needs. We can use this here, we can use this there. Did you go through these types of lists and kind of check off things?
Yeah, it was important. This information is available on our website. We have a Joplin Spotlight section that currently has the documentation that helps residents understand, the intricacies of CDBG, and especially CDBG DR funds. So disaster recovery is a different animal above and beyond just normal CDBG programs. So there's a lot of explanation in there in terms of basic national objectives that have to be met if you're going to use those dollars, and then what type of areas you can use those dollars in, and then even within those areas what the requirements are to spend those dollars down. So it was a good 3-hour conversation with council during the first work session to walk them through that process as well, just to let them understand what the funds can and cannot be used for. Then we're able to use that information then to frame the discussion on the actual projects themselves. And there were, I think, a total of 39 projects that were identified as being potential uses of this particular funding source. Ultimately 24 projects were deemed eligible, and so that was the process that we used to narrow that list of 24 projects totaling, I think, over $300 million down to 12 projects that they voted on to spend the remaining $97 million that hadn't been allocated previously through other sources.
Well, now that the City Council has voted and said this is our list, people are curious what happens next. Well, what's the process from here?
Well, the first thing we're doing right now is scheduling all these projects. HUD, part of this funding, the $113 million, HUD has given us a timeline of committing those funds by September of 2017 and expending them by September of 2019. So there's not a lot of time.
Short window of opportunity there. Yeah.
And another challenge, especially with infrastructure, is you can't do all the infrastructure projects at once. You of course want to do your underground infrastructure projects first and then above ground. You definitely don't want to close all the streets in that area at once.
Right.
So the scheduling right now is occurring. Make sure we meet our timelines.
And this is all being coordinated with projects already underway in the city for other means, other projects and things.
Yeah, we received federal highway administration funds through the Tiger program, so the 20th Street Overpass project, the widening of Maiden Lane and 26th and Schiffer-Decker. I mean, there's just a lot of projects that are going on through those funding. Of course, the Economic Development Administration through the U.S. Department of Commerce gave us a $20 million grant to build the library, so that project is going to be breaking ground here in September. And then we also just state funding. The state gave us a $14 million grant to essentially rebuild the infrastructure that was not eligible for use of CDBG funds. So we have a lot of those projects that are going on right now, and it's going to be an inconvenience for residents for a while, especially from now until 2019 as we tear up some streets and some sidewalks. But the goal is to put them back in a condition that's nicer and long lasting, so that they don't have to have the road resurfaced every 7 years.
So they can
Stretch it
last
out
for a
little
while,
bit.
right?
Exactly.
So people will get used to seeing the cones and the detour signs around town.
Yeah. And we do what we can to try and message that out to residents. So, if folks are interested in hearing what's going on, we'll push information out through our Facebook page, through our Twitter account, through various media outlets and shows like this. We're always more than happy to reach out to the public and let them know what's going on. And if they have questions, they can call us as well.
So as you start approaching these projects and say, we're going to start step one of infrastructure, you'll be letting people know this month we're going to start working in this area on this type of work.
Yeah, communication is the key to all this.
Well, even with the city being able to have this type of funding to allow you to accomplish a lot of things, planning for the future. You've both mentioned that this is not only a project to rebuild what Joplin had, but to look beyond 2019, 2020, and on into the future. So I imagine from the city perspective, this gives you a lot of opportunities looking down the road.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, it does. I mean, we have to look at the viability of our community in the future. We looked at this as an opportunity to envision the community we need and want, not only now but in the future, to make sure that Joplin remains viable.
And I know you had a lot of citizen input post-storm, people saying, I'd like to see this, I'd like to see that. Is that a continual process? You're always listening to people or encouraging input?
Yeah, I mean, through this particular process of this capital planning, we reached out to a lot of stakeholders who had involved, not just with the projects, but had been involved in those previous discussions through the CART process or, through the long-range transportation study and some of those things to reach out to them and make sure that the projects were still viable and eligible for funding. And as we move forward, we'll continue to have those meetings. There are certain review periods as we amend our action plan and get the funding allocated from HUD for the projects. We don't just have,
Here's the book and we're going to do it right now.
We don't have bags of money laying around City Hall, so we have to go through that process. We'll pass a resolution with City Council here in the future, and then we'll start to amend those action plans as those projects get scheduled out, and we'll receive those dollars, and then actually we get reimbursed for those dollars.
So you have to spend it, then the government said, here's the check for the work you did.
And then they reimburse us for it. So we have to, again, to make sure that we're spending our taxpayer dollars wisely and not getting too far ahead of ourselves. We have to be careful on how we sequence these projects out.
Staging them through the future.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank both of you for visiting today, providing some information for our viewers.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah,
Thank you,
our
Judy.
pleasure.
You're welcome.
See you.
And I'd like to thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. Hopefully we've answered some questions for you concerning Community Development Block Grant disaster recovery. If you have more information you'd like to find out, of course, you can contact City Hall or check their website. I'm Judy Stiles. Hope you can join me again next week. We'll see you then.